Hi and welcome back to Bike Speed. So this week we've got this lovely BMC mountain bike. This bike in its current state, as you see it here, was actually unrideable, and we'll explain the reason why shortly. So it was we had to do chain set, chain, cassette and a general service on this and some cabling work. You'll see what a difference we make to this bike as we go. So initially we had a problem with the chain set, so we're stripping the bike down now. What was happening was the chain set he described as the pedal was moving on itself on the splines of the chain set. So we ordered a new chain set in and we're addressing that. But we're just removing this cassette. The cassette nut was way too tight. We actually even had to use a breaker bar on that. 40 Newton meters for those, which isn't a lot. They should never be as tight as that one was. Now you can see here on this pedal arm, there's no pre-tensioner on the bearing. There was a lot of damage on the splines. So as this pedal arm would move on there if it wasn't forced on really tightly. You should have this pre-tensioner here on all pedal arms, but that was completely missing off the bike. And then there's also a safety washer, which you see has got a little peg on the bottom of it. That completely sheared off on the customer's one. So where it had been turning around, that should fit in a little hole on the shaft that goes right through the bottom bracket. And that was completely missing, so it's quite dangerous. Now also, we had here, the gear cables were crossed over underneath there, so it caused the steering to spring back, as you can see there, and the cable had actually come out of its clip, all because those cables were crossed. You should never ever cross over your gear cables. They should both run down the side of the frame to the side of the lever. This is the front 3-speed here, and they actually have, this is universal, it'll do 2 or 3-speed. We're on a 2-speed, so we need to flick that little latch there to get the cable out. Then the cable slides out of there nice and easily. So we're removing all the cables, we're replacing all those because we didn't want them crossed over. And you know, it was important to get this right so as the bike was actually safe and wouldn't veer your steering off wildly. Although this is actually just a standard service for this video, it's a service that had a few detailings needed. We do always wash the bikes that we service, we clean them all up. Part of a standard routine service for us here at Bike Speeds. So we're just giving this bike a little clean up now. It was quite handy because we had the bottom bracket off and all the wheels and everything. A good time to do it anyway, so we do all that as part of the service. So it's not really a detailing, it's just a wash down just to make that bike sparkle a little bit and be presented well, so that when you get back on a Bike Speed service you're like ready to go. You know, it's a nice feeling. So we're cleaning up the brakes. We use a spray brake cleaner which evaporates, and initially we clean up the disc. Most servicing we do, we will literally just clean the disc and that will be enough. But this one was a little bit scored, and also because we were doing it for the video, we give this one maybe just a little bit more attention than even it needed. But it's nice to have done it anyway. So we're just cleaning up that disc. Again, after we've sanded it, a little bit of brake cleaner to get any debris off. And that disc is now ready to go back on the bike. We had a little broken valve cap here. Replaced that, just a small detail. Costs next to nothing, but it's just the things, the details that make the bike right when it goes out, rather than having something broken on it. So new cassette. The old cassette was quite worn on this bike, so we put on a new cassette, torqued that to 40 Newton meters, so as it wasn't too tight next time to take off. Torqued up the disc to 40 Newton meters, lubricated and oiled the quick release for the wheel with new oils. That just stops it sticking. And then we come to the brakes. You can see these pads were almost as new. They hadn't really got any debris on them, so they only just needed a little clean up. So we clean up the actual caliper itself, and then we clean up the pads, the back of the pads. And you'll see now we'll put a little bit of copper slip on here. That will stop that piston sticking to that, stop a little bit of vibration. We had a comment last week about the oils and greases that we use, and about metal to metal, more notably in the comment about copper slip and our regular white grease. We are actually going to do a video in the future, or we're sort of in the stage of planning that one, where we'll explain our greases and our oils, and we'll also explain why we often do metal to metal greasing and oiling, where perhaps you might under normal circumstances think, well, is that right? But it is right, and we'll explain the reasons why. So we're just giving those derailleurs a little clean up. We actually use a chain cleaner on these rather than a degreaser, because it evaporates out, and it's a less messy way of cleaning those up when they're on the bike still like this, and not going through our ultrasonic cleaner. While the chain sets off, we just torque up that bottom bracket, make sure that's correct. A bit of fresh grease in there. It helps the new chain set seat nicely into there for the pre-tensioner and everything else. So on goes our new chain set there, and then you can see we've got that little spacer that I explained with the peg. That's now in the hole in the chain set. Pre-tensioner's in there. These bolts are done up, torqued to 13 Newton meters, these two, and now that is absolutely as it should be on the bike, and it shouldn't cause trouble like the original did. A little bit of copper slip on those pedals, and then they're torqued up to 40 Newton meters as well. And again, like I say, in that future video, we'll explain why we actually copper slip those threads and what glue, greases and oils we use where. So on goes the back wheel now. We're beginning to put the bike back together. You notice we've turned the tyre on the front there so that the logo matches up with the valve. The rear already did, so that was handy, but we did line up that front logo on the tyre. New chain going on here. We sized these to the frame. We'll probably do a video on that at some point. Now we're just getting that. This was the cable that had pulled itself out because it was incorrectly cabled before. So we're now just putting those gear cables on there. They're stainless steel. A little spacer on there to stop it rattling against the frame. Now this was interesting. We've got the BMC Switzerland chain guard there, which is like an elasticated cover, but that was catching the cable. It was stopping the gears changing down. So I put a little bit of Jaguar inner cable along there, along the chainstay, to stop that rubbing so much. So now when we put this on, the cable is running through a guide, so it's not going to get trapped on that chainstay cover. So now we had a lovely gear change there afterwards. Fresh cables, fresh oils, fresh grease, all nicely lubricated, new cassette, new chain set, and yeah, it was a completely different bike to the way it came in. We're just finishing off the cables here. We've done the rear, now we're doing the front, so you can see they're not crossed over now. You'll see how the steering is much freer and smoother to use and far less dangerous than how it was set up before. Front derailleur is changing gear nicely, a couple of little adjustments there, and that's perfect. So a new tail on the end of the cable. Now when we torque this up, you see how this torque wrench keeps turning. It's a quarter of a turn or so on each one. Each of these is torqued up, but this bike was very, very loose, especially these crown bolts. They were so loose, I'm surprised the handlebars didn't twist around. Everything on this bike that we torqued seemed loose. It was not really quite set up correctly, this bike. So you see how this saddle moves. That given time, a rough ride in a wooded area or wherever you're going off-roading, that would have been off of there and you'd have ended up with the saddle on the floor. It's important to get your torque settings correct on a bike. We're just torquing the brake calipers there onto the frame as well. Just checking the odd fittings by hand, and then we're getting to the final stages now. They need a little bit of air in the forks. They were very, very low. I sort of gauge the weight of a rider by when they come in, and then I check the specs for the specific forks and pump them up. And then we're pumping up the tyres as well. And just the final details on the bike. A little bit of silicone detailer on there just to make the bike really pop out. And that's now ready for the customer to collect. As you can see from these before and after shots, even this regular standard service makes such a vast difference to the bike, and it's such a different bike to ride. It's well worth doing. So thanks for watching, and we'll see you again next week.